The views expressed and opinions given by the individual hosts and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Z-Talk Radio, its affiliates, or sponsors.
Welcome, and tonight from the Dark Shadows we have best-selling true crime author Ron Franscell, known for great books like Delivered from Evil and The Darkest Night. We're going to talk to him about writing true crime right after these words.
Now for the House of Mystery Case Files.
A maddened former Marine, a 24-year-old student in the architectural school named Charles Whitman, first killed his wife and mother in their home. Then he fled to the top of the University Tower, a 27-story building, and from there shot to death at least 13 other people and wounded at least 31. The carnage did not end until police ended Whitman's life with several bullets.
These images are more of war than of a small fast food restaurant in San Isidro. Yet it was a local man dressed in battle fatigues who declared, "I have killed 1,000, I'm gonna kill 1,000 more."
Other guests flee to the balconies, trapped between flames and bullets. A terrified black maid is told, "Don't worry, we're only shooting whites today." Then the snipers barricade themselves on the roof and shoot arriving firemen.
Last night, the bodies were removed from the cafeteria where they had lain since the noon hour. The new pickup truck the killer had driven through the front window was still inside, with blood all over the front of it. He had gotten out of this pickup with a 9mm pistol and began shooting people.
That tower has haunted Austin, Texas for more than 40 years. It reminds us that we know plenty about mass murderers, but also that we still haven't developed any science that would foil a murderous rampage that's hatched inside a maniac's head and leaves no trail until it's too late. So, sadly, we'll always have victims and survivors, about whom we can predict even less. That's because they're the rest of us. I spent a year with the survivors of mass murderers and serial killers. This book is their story. These 10 stories explore the moment when these survivors and their killers cross paths, but they also explore how they've coped with the pain over the years and what the ripple effect has been for them. Each is as much about surviving life as it is about surviving the tragedies themselves. These 10 survivors all came within a whisper of dying, even as people were dying all around them. Yet each understands that without forgiveness, they rot from the inside out. They don't excuse the behavior of monsters, and nor do they deny their own pain. But they refuse to let the monsters darken the rest of their lives. And all of them feel some debt to the dead. Each is aware that to squander this gift, this second life, is to betray what so many others lost. Right here on a summer day in 1966, a college student named Roland Elke was shot by Charles Whitman from that tower. He didn't die that day, although he had one friend who did. Instead, the bullets that hit Roland Elke changed the course of his life forever. He survived his wounds, and he became a minister, a professor, and a father. This book is about the capacity of the human spirit to triumph over monsters. Distilling all of this into words and putting them between the covers of a book seems somehow inadequate to me. I'm not even sure exactly how to tell the complete story of what happened, or what might be happening still, or to explain what it feels like to owe a debt to the dead. But I know this. It's spots like this one. It's places just like this. This is where their stories begin.
Now here's something we hope you'll really like.
And we're back. Joining us, Ron Franscell. Thank you for taking time to talk to us today.
Al, it's my pleasure. I'm just delighted to be with you.
Oh, thank you. So now you've done several books, great books. Now, did you start out as a true crime writer, or was there something else that came before that?
Well, in my book writing career, I wrote a literary novel. Was my first book out of the box. Then I wrote a couple of mysteries after that. But in my professional career, normally a newspaper reporter and editor. And at the time, The Darkest Night sort of came to me as an idea. I was covering the Middle East for the Denver Post in those really turbulent, scary days right after 9/11. And it was coming back from the Middle East when I was done and when I was tired, and I was probably susceptible to some of those things that your brain does when you're not on guard. That I began to see this crime against two young friends of mine in 1973, two girls that lived next door to me. I began to see that as much like what we had gone through after 9/11, where we went to bed on September 10th, and before we woke up again on September 12th, the world had changed. And this case that I write about in The Darkest Night is like that. We went to bed as this marvelous little, ideal little American town on September 23rd of 1973. But by the time we went to bed the next night, our town had changed completely. That wasn't unique to my town, of course. We all go through some rite of passage like that, some loss of innocence. All of us do. But this was a story about when it happened to me and to the people who lived around me. And so in that sense, I wasn't really writing a true crime. I didn't approach it as a true crime. I approached it as a true story that happened to be about a crime, but I would really wanted to get more into the social study of it, to dissect this crime, and ultimately, I guess, to explore the nature of memory in a small town.
So when you say you're dissecting and trying to get that, how did you go about doing that?
Well, I did it the way a journalist would. You know, you go out there and you just wade around in it. Now, in my day, I'm not that old, but I'm older than the current crop of journalists. In my day, you did that by getting your boots on the ground and going where it happened, so you could see, so you could smell, so you could taste everything that you needed to tell the story. And that's exactly what happened. I went back to my hometown in Wyoming. I began to peel that onion. You know, I began to get all the documentation, to get all the pictures, to go to all the places, to talk to the people, and to begin to reconstruct a story around which a certain mythology had grown over 30 years, and some of that mythology truly was mythical. It had grown out of proportion to reality. So I really needed to rebuild everything and to sort fact from fiction, and to go way back in not only my memory but in a town's memory to tell this story. And it took me, I guess, a little more than a year, about 13 months, to do that. And then I began to write, and the book was finished, and then nothing. We were unsuccessful at selling it, simply because true crime publishing, like publishing of any kind, has its own little house rules, and they change from time to time. But at the time, the house rules were a crime that happened more than 10 years ago is really not that interesting, and so we'll pass. And that's one reason we had a difficult time selling it. We finally did sell it to a small publisher who almost immediately turned around and sold the paperback rights to St. Martin's Press in New York. And the book, when it finally came out, became a national bestseller, and the rest is history.
What do you think? It became a national bestseller. Why did it take off, do you think, like that? Like, what was it about this story or this book that you did that made it take off? Do you have an idea on that?
I don't. I mean, I'm thankful for whatever it was, because it expanded what had been a small town's over-the-fence gossip-type story to a national level, and spread the story of these two, this night of horror for these two young girls, and then everything that comes after that, every horrible thing that comes after that, to a national audience. And suddenly people were hearing about this who'd never heard about it in the previous 35 years, and who suddenly had a different view of not only this particular crime, but also this idea of how one brutal act can send forth ripples that reverberate through generations. And we're still, in my small town, we still can start a conversation with anybody who's been there for any length of time in just a few words about this case. Everybody knows about it. Everybody has a feeling about it. We're actually into a period now where it's lapsed into this sort of the mythology of the place too, so that it's kind of a cautionary tale. Parents tell their kids, hey, be careful when you go down to the store. I once knew about these two girls, and then they tell the story. So it's been a fascinating thing, and I think that resonates with people, even if they weren't familiar with the story at first.
Yeah.
I think another thing, though, is the personal nature of it. The fact that we have a writer here, a professional writer, who's telling a story in which he was peripherally involved. And my involvement was purely as another kid, the kid that lives next door, literally, who was affected by this crime. So the fact that we have somebody with that intimate connection it makes this a different kind of story, sort of in the vein of James Ellroy's My Dark Places or The Stranger Beside Me by Anne Rule. Anybody who picks up the book is reading a book by somebody who was there. or at least close. And I think that seems to resonate with readers.
Yeah, you've got to realize it is something special you've done, but because it's not about a major, it's not like a Ted Bundy or a Zodiac or something that's a major killing like serial, that there's been movies and everything and years of it. So it's really touched a lot of people, so that's a special thing.
I think it has, and actually, I think so many of the crimes we find ourselves writing about are things that we hadn't heard of before, certainly. But I think they have this power to both frighten us and to sober us, but also maybe to give us some tools for dealing with a lot of difficulties we face in our lives. I think we might talk about my book, Delivered from Evil. There's an example of, telling these horrific crime stories with a purpose. And when we can do that, I think we transcend that what I call the supermarket true crime, which tends to be more pulpy and more aimed at the people who want 16 pages of shocking photos and lurid descriptions and recitations of the trial transcript. There's a part of the true crime market, that's what they want to read. But there's another part of the true crime market, and I think it was really Truman Capote who breathed life into these people, and that's the more literary, more analytical, the crime story that kind of holds a mirror up to us and shows us ourselves, and really ends up being about us. And I think these stories, like The Darkest Night, are where that gets the most traction, I think, because they are us. And it is easier, I think, for the reader then to see him or herself in these two girls.
And I think also the timing. One thing about 1973, if we go back to the time,
mm-hmm.
it was. I don't want to. I guess it's a lot more naive. I don't think the parents. I remember I was 11 years old. For us to go out and play and stuff was very common. It wasn't so guarded as it is now.
Sure. I mean, and I think that was exactly the way we were in this little town, where you were sort of shoved out the door in the morning on summer mornings, and you might come back around dinner time, and then you're out the door again. And often I remember our parents would say something like, "Check in when the street lights come on."
Yeah.
Or that didn't mean you were coming in. It just meant make sure that you drop in and tell us what you're doing. And playing, riding your bike for miles in every direction, and very clear memories of riding my bikes on my neighborhood streets and hearing the people inside the houses. They've got their windows open and their curtains pulled back, and I could see them in there. We had this extraordinary glimpse into other lives, and we felt part of them in a sense. And so we were free. We were completely free. And that's not to say there weren't any rules, but we were completely free. And yet, when this event happens and two girls are snatched, basically, in a grocery store parking lot by two local thugs, and then terrorized through the night and brutalized, taken to a bridge out in the middle of nowhere, and that means something in Wyoming. to say the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And they're thrown off this bridge 12 stories into a canyon, 12 stories deep, and a river below. And one of them dies and one of them doesn't. Story gets provocative from there, but what happened was that ideal world, that utopia that we imagined, quickly changed. Suddenly the parents, there was nobody out past dark. Doors were getting locked. Your movements were severely controlled. Nobody wanted that to happen again. And we saw that after 9/11, didn't we? I mean, think about how suddenly after 9/11 we have a whole new set of rules that we have to live by, and we're suddenly afraid of shadows again. And I like I say, in that I saw the analog. So again, it's not the way the typical true crime book is inspired. So it came from a little different angle, but it is a true crime. There's no question about that. It just didn't start that way.
So now when you went back to start putting together the research for the book, it says now you've done more than 100 interviews. That's a lot of people in a small town.
Yeah.
How was the reaction? Like how were people about this? Like were they very open to the idea, and did they want to talk, or did they want to forget?
Sometimes they're all over the lot. There wasn't nobody who just said, "Oh, let the sleeping dogs lie, don't do anything." There were people who, confessed they didn't recall much, or there were people who recalled a lot, but it was wrong. But that was all part of the story, too. Again, how this story had taken on a different kind of legendary life in this town. But no, there was no real reluctance to talk that forestalled doing the book. I think a crime writer always runs into someone who thinks he shouldn't be doing this because it's scraping it open, or it's giving some notoriety to the killers, or a variety of reasons. It helped me enormously to have been from that town. I think, and it's been said over and over again since the book came out, that one of the saving graces is, at least from the perspective of the people in the town, is that it was told by one of us. It wasn't some New Yorker who came out here and plopped down and decided to write about a small town in Wyoming. It was one of us. So when I do talk about some of the grittier, darker things, it's generally accepted. It's generally embraced. It's generally at least given a pass because I was from there. So I think that helped enormously.
Yeah. Oh, it must have. Now, with Becky Thompson, were you able to talk to her?
Well, I knew Becky, of course.
Yeah.
And after the crime, she survived that night in the canyon and miraculously got herself out of that canyon that was these sheer walls, and went on, and continued her life. And I knew her before the crime and after the crime. In the book, I talk about her two lives, and they are divided by that crime. Of course, I can't talk too much about this or give away one of the most startling twists in this book.
Right.
But yeah, I knew Becky. I couldn't talk to her for this book, but I knew her personally, and I knew both of them personally, both victims in this case personally.
So there were two people. So do you want to kind of maybe take us to the crime and kind of give us a little overview of what happened?
Well, it took me about 100. I should have an elevator explanation of this, but The Darkest Night is this intimate story about two childhood friends of mine who suffered it unspeakably at the hands of a couple killers in the small town where we grew up. And it involves their abduction from a local grocery store parking lot, their terror, the terror that was inflicted on them by these two guys over the evening and the midnight, and then being taken out to this bridge, and the youngest 11-year-old Amy, was thrown off fairly quickly and died. And then Becky, 18, was raped by both of these guys, and then she too was thrown off. Miraculously, she survived, and she was able to get out. And in a strange sense, she's able to identify her attackers. They are arrested fairly quickly because they're familiar to police. Her descriptions, police knew almost immediately who they were. They're arrested. Ultimately, they go to trial and are convicted and sentenced to die. That's the point at which most true crime books end. In some ways, it's where this one begins. There's a whole other story that begins at that moment, and it has to do with both our national ambivalence about the death penalty. It has to do with victims' rights. It has to do with how we treat, as a community, victims of crime. And it goes into it goes into great detail about all of that. So I would think that at its heart, The Darkest Night is about one woman's search for equilibrium. She wanted to put solid ground beneath her again. And she might never have found those answers for herself, but her search sort of leads the rest of us to some answers. I think that the process of writing this book convinced me that evil is all around us, and we simply can't avoid it. And thinking about that not only in terms of a crime like this, but in terms of terrorism, I think a life in journalism and this experience convinced me there's really no genuinely safe place in this world. But it hasn't made me fearful about living life. It's just made me understand how important it is to live. As somebody said, some people are so worried about dying that they never start living. I think that this book is an outstanding example of the perils of not living. So that's a kind of airy explanation. But to me, this story existed on this gritty, real level, and then on this much more philosophical level.
And do you think the system's changed since then, since 1973? Do you think, like, for victims and the whole process of the death penalty and the way everything goes, Do you think it's changed for the better?
I think in some ways we're doing better for victims. You know, back in 1973, there weren't teddy bear memorials, there weren't scholarship funds, there weren't outpourings of support. There certainly wasn't social media. Murder and rape and violent death were like cancer, right? We spoke about it in hushed terms. We couldn't say it out loud, you know. Little 11-year-old Amy's funeral was purposely scheduled during the school day so the kids wouldn't go. But for the most part, parents weren't going to let them go anyway because that was the time. There was a belief we don't expose children to that. Think about that today. I mean, today we'd have grief counselors, we'd have all. None of that happened. So I think we're better in dealing with victims today. Not perfect, but better. As far as the death penalty is concerned, those arguments are still going on. The things that happen to people in the system can still be seem unjust, both to people like us and to people who are against the death penalty and who you know, who want something else to happen. And we've just never settled it. I mean, everybody's kind of angry about it. So, no, in terms of punishment, no, I don't think we have. In terms of victims, I think we've sort of improved how we deal with. I think we have improved. I'll just leave it at that. I think we have a ways to go.
Yeah. Now, also, when we go into your Deliver It from Evil book, you also do true stories of ordinary people, and they're kind of faced with something, and they survive. So, I guess my thought is, now, you like to write the stories from the victim's point of view.
Yes and no. I mean, I'm not really writing from their perspective, but I'm writing with their perspective front and center. I'm writing. I want to tell the story of those people who didn't choose to be in the situation they're in, who now have to deal with it. That's certainly true in The Darkest Night, and Delivered from Evil was a sort of overt attempt to do that. Delivered from Evil is a book about 10 survivors of mass killers. These are just ordinary people like any of us on any street on any given day in America that found themselves suddenly face to face with either a mass murderer or a serial killer, and by the grace of God, survived. The book explores how these two paths converged and what happens next. But then it goes into how these ordinary folks began to restore some semblance of normalcy to their lives. And I say semblance because in none of these cases do I think they restored the same normal as they had before. They just restored something that looks like normal, feels like normal, and that they can live with. And so it was fascinating to do because I spent with these 10 people, I spent 2 weeks with each one of them, up to 2 weeks with each one of them, and the greatest challenge I faced was getting past their natural defenses. As you can imagine, these were people who didn't really trust strangers. I mean, at least one significant time in their lives, a stranger had nearly killed them. So here was this guy shows up on the front door and the front porch and says, "Hey, I'd like to tell your story." So our first day or so was usually spent listening to them tell me the story that they'd probably told 1,000 times. And they were sort of reciting it, just by rote. And after that second day, we began to talk about things that, they hadn't talked a lot about. And by the end of the second week, we were I was generally asking questions that they had never contemplated before, uncomfortable questions. And by that time, I had built up enough trust with them that they were answering uncomfortable questions. So that was a great challenge. But again, you're telling these stories, again, not from their perspective per se, but with their perspective haunting the whole story. So by the end of the year that I had to research this book, I really began to see how extraordinary these ordinary people were. So this book became a book about the human spirit, about resilience and our capacity for triumph. We all have our traumas and our grief, and maybe it's a death in the family or a divorce or missed opportunities that drag us down. I think, though, you can read these stories and come to the conclusion that if these people can look a killer in the eye and somehow find their way back to something that feels like normal, then there's hope for the rest of us. And that was kind of an overriding theme in the stories.
Very, very. Do you think that these mass killings have changed now? Do you think they've evolved into something different? So like with the movie theaters and the schools and stuff, something that we hadn't seen back before in the 70s and earlier times?
Well, it's funny odd that you'd say that. The fact is that the dawn of the age of mass murder, particularly mass shootings, is 1949, when Howard Unruh, this World War II vet in Camden, New Jersey, takes a gun and just starts walking around his neighborhood, shooting everybody. I mean, he's shooting everybody. And then he goes back to his house and he holes up there until the cops come, and there's a siege, and he finally gives up. And he was a disturbed collector of wounds. He imagined everybody had it out for him. He never forgot any slight, and everything was a slight. I was struck when I'm listening to the story and reading and watching the story of the Roanoke shooting, where the disgruntled ex-TV reporter kills two colleagues in cold blood on live TV. How, at its heart, it was kind of the same story. Another collector of wounds who goes on a rampage. He added the element of live TV, and then horrifyingly the social media element of it. But at their heart, we're still dealing with the same things. If you go through the history of mass murder, you see the ones that stand out are obviously the death count is something that weighs heavily on that. But they also do something that makes it a little different than the last one. By 1966, we have Charles Whitman going up in the University of Texas Tower and killing people. You know, we have James Huberty going into the McDonald's in San Ysidro, California, and killing people. Then we have George Hennard driving his truck into the Luby's cafeteria and killing people. Then we have the Virginia Tech shooter going through campus and killing people. We have Columbine. They're adding these little fascinating bits to this horrible tragedy, right? Think of it as a play that's going on, a tragic play. They're adding some bit of scenery, some bit of costuming, some bit of technology, something that makes it a little different than the last one. And so that's why they stand out. I think you're correct in saying maybe we're a little different now, and I would say that what's different now is the frequency. And I really do think there is a slight uptick in frequency of mass murder, but we also have to bear in mind we also have an explosion in media. So things that happened in 2015 that we might not have heard about in 1975 because there wasn't that pervasive media.
Right.
Now we always hear, and we hear about all of them, and we're exposed to all of them, so it feels like there's more.
Did you also think that's a contributing factor, especially on U.S. media, because it's primarily focused on this? You know, like it'll be played over and over and very extensively on something. So more so than when you view other countries' media about this, it's mentioned and it's talked about, and it's moved. They just kind of move on, and it's not so opinionated. So, do you think that's a contributing factor? Do you think that makes it more?
I think that the contributing factor is 24-hour news. I think, again, let's go back to 75 and think about what we have. We have 3 channels. Mm-hmm. The news programs were, you know, at specified times, and all the news of the world had to be jammed into those, you know, half hours or hours, you know, around the dinner hour and then at 10 o'clock at night. And so there really wasn't this opportunity to do that kind of wall-to-wall stuff. We just didn't have time. The 24-hour news channels, though, now have to fill 24 hours. Yeah. So any event, if it's otherwise a slow news day, and a guy picks up a gun and goes into a theater and shoots, this is going to probably play for at least 24 hours. It's going to be the lead story for 24 hours, and you're going to see the same 27-second loop of video from outside the theater over and over and over and over again. So we're being barraged by it in this sort of, we're being overcome by a tsunami of information that isn't that much information generally. You know, they're just repeating it over and over. So I think there's that. I think there's a certain information anxiety that we all have. But I do think that mediascape is affecting those who would do this. And I think in the Virginia case, we see a guy who seemed very intent on using the mediascape to as a part of his crime. So that worries me. It worries me to think that we're going to now see people using Twitter and YouTube and Facebook to commit horrendous crimes, and then spread it to the world.
Yeah.
The old gatekeepers have lost control of the gate.
Yeah. Well, it seems to be it's a step to basically film it yourself and post it on your own Facebook.
Yep, absolutely.
That's also, I mean, the last time, it reminded me of the Luca Magnotta murders, or like when he, if you remember him in Montreal, when he filmed the beheading and having sex and that with this victim and posting it online.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It was just, he would have done it live, but they didn't have the technology at the time.
Right.
So it's kind of like a progression now, so we can just do it much quicker now.
Well, we see ISIS, of course, doing it, and we've seen various punks, videotaping, beating up a bum or beating up, an elderly lady or doing something they shouldn't and posting it and getting caught. But this seems like a deliberate, in the sense that it's deliberate too with ISIS. This seems like a very deliberate intent to use social media to heighten the impact of the crime. And I fear that we've crossed the Rubicon on this. I fear that this is going to be a thing now. This is going to be what a lot of criminals will do, and there might even be a little arms race that goes on to see who can do it bigger and badder. And I hope I'm wrong, but I fear that, knowing what I know from 35 years of journalism experience and crime writing. I fear we're in for that we haven't yet seen the worst of those kinds of acts using social media.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think there's also a feed for it, because a lot of people are still attracted to watch it.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know how many views that video had before it was taken down by YouTube. My guess is it probably approached 1 million. So for everybody who says, "Oh my God, I don't want to see that," and they look away, there's maybe one or two who say, "Well, I do want to see it." And as a crime writer, I have a professional interest in this. I do want to see it. I don't relish the idea of seeing it. My stomach is turned by it. But if you expect me to tell a story, especially a true story, an authentic story, a genuine story, then I think you deserve to know that I saw it. And even though I'm not going to be writing about the Roanoke, I think this notion began to develop in me when I was covering the Middle East, and Danny Pearl was abducted and beheaded. It became important to me to watch that video, and I did one time. That's all I needed. To understand the people I was writing about, to understand the issues, and to feel, not in my head, but in my gut, what this was about. And as a crime writer, I'm trying to make you feel in your gut what this story is about. I want you to read it. I want you to think about it. I want it to affect your thoughts. But I also want to hit you in the gut and have you get a sense for this on a much more visceral, much more primitive level. And now, that said, I don't tend to be the kind of grisly writer who exploits every drop of blood. That's not my interest. I'm talking about some of the horror that these two girls might have felt that night, for instance, or the horror of of somebody who's confronted by a serial killer in her own home. It doesn't require me to tell you about intestines and blood. It requires me to understand on a very visceral level what scares you, and then to show how this is one of those things. So yeah, I think there's the storyteller in me, but then there's the human, and as a human, I'm a little fearful for where we're going.
No.
The storyteller in me follows suit, but I have this belief, I guess it's my journalism, that it says, by talking about it, by telling you the story, somehow we'll be better. I think I think there's some kind of value to understanding what happened and how it happened, and at least having the facts available. You might want to look away, I understand that, but my job isn't to hide anything from you, but to find a way to make you feel what happened.
And you do. And now, on previous shows, we've had a lot of writers on, and I always ask them if there's writers that influence them or people that they read, and anybody out there that they think is excellent at writing. Now, your name came up a few times, and probably the most common, let's say, description of you is that you're a very descriptive writer. And now, who out there sort of, maybe influences or perhaps you really like to read? Is there anybody out there that you can't wait till the book comes out?
I'm going to confess something to you, and then I'm going to answer your question. But first, I'm going to a confession. The fact is that since I started writing books almost 20 years ago, very quickly after that, I stopped reading books for fun. I haven't picked up a book for fun, for leisure, in almost 20 years. I lost my ability to read for fun. I began to look at books, and when I was feeling something, I wanted to see what they did. I wanted to see how they wrote that. How did they do that? How did they make me feel that? Pretty soon it became like a carpenter walking into a house, right? He can't appreciate this beautiful house. He's got to look and see, how did they do that? And that's no fun. That's just not fun.
Yeah. So
I stopped picking up books. I have not picked up a book for fun. Now, I'll answer your question. I have read for research, I have read for book reviews, and I typically read all my true crime colleagues' books, either for them or because it's written by them. And I'm not really reading for fun, but I'm reading because this is something I think we do in our little small circle. And there are so many of them. I think with the passing this summer of Vince Bugliosi and Ann Rule, I look around and I say, who's likely to succeed to the throne of the reigning true crime writer? And I believe that's probably Greg Olson, and I believe Greg is one of the more graceful, elegant writers in the genre. He's doing less true crime now, but I still believe he's one of the best, if not the best. Steve Jackson is another, and Steve and I are friends going way back from Colorado, and I think that Steve again is a more gritty, a grittier writer who knows story backwards and forwards, who understands these characters better than anybody in the world. If I want to know about somebody, I think I'd go to Steve Jackson. He immerses himself in characters. And then there are a slew of others, and I'll get in trouble if I start naming and miss one. But among the ones that I admire in crime, Steve and Greg are honestly, Caitlin Rother is another who has always impressed me. But when you talk about that the detail in the writing and the vividness of the words, that doesn't come from crime writing. That comes from reading people like Pat Conroy and John Irving and Ernest Hemingway and Jack Kerouac and that ilk. It comes from a lifetime up to 20 years ago of reading classics and reading really good literature, not commercial literature. So I think the way I write is influenced by the way I read, and I love the classics. I love the language. I love turning that all over, and I keep going back to that idea of hitting you in the gut. I think we do that. I only get this little dab of ink on a piece of paper to do that. I can't walk up to you and slug you in the gut. But with this little dab of ink and this little piece of paper, I can do a little magic, and it might feel like I did. So that's really my aim. There's some great writers out there, but they're all over the lot. Like I say, if I started naming, I'd get in trouble by leaving somebody out.
That's how it goes. Well, it's been a great hour. I've really enjoyed talking with you, and I hope that you're able to come back and do it again.
Well, I hope so. Call me up. Next year we're coming out with a new book. It's called Morgue, and I wrote it with one of the world's most celebrated medical examiners, Dr. Vincent DeMaio, and it looks at 12 or 13 of his most fascinating cases, from the exhumation of Lee Harvey Oswald to the suicide of Vincent van Gogh to murder trial of Phil Spector and so many others. So we've got plenty more to talk about.
Wow. What an interesting life you lead. That's fascinating.
Well, and then some days I mow the lawn.
Yeah. but that's good too, right? The balance is there. So now, just for anybody that needs to get a hold of you, or if they want to contact you or send you some ideas, or who knows, how would you say they should go about doing that?
The best thing they can do is go to my website, which is www.ronfranscell.com. And, of course, the spelling is strange, so it's RONFRANSCELL.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to get to talk writing with you and with your fans.
Thank you.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of the Z-Talk Radio Network.
I'll be back.